There's a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when something in you dies, not with a scream, not with blood, but with silence, like a candle that simply doesn't reignite. At first, you try to relight it. You think, maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I just need to go back. Back to the familiar. Back to the identity that once kept you warm, even if it suffocated you. But something in you knows that warmth was a fever. That version of you was a performance. And the stage is gone now. You wake up and no longer feel the urge to explain yourself. You walk into rooms and feel out of place, but no longer care. You talk less. You watch more. You scroll past your own old posts like they were written by a stranger because they were. This is the beginning of your funeral, and no one will bring flowers. People liked that version of you. They miss who you were, not because they loved you, but because you were predictable, safe, manageable. You laughed at the right moments, agreed when it kept the peace, shrank when your truth felt too sharp for their comfort. But now you don't laugh when it's not funny. You say no without guilt. You say, I don't know, without shame. They notice, and they flinch, not because you became cruel, but because you stopped auditioning. You weren't supposed to grow out of them. You were supposed to grow with them, but not beyond. Your growth exposes their stagnation. Your clarity threatens their denial. Your boundaries feel like betrayal. And suddenly, you're the villain in stories where you were once the silent hero. People will say, you've changed. And you'll want to say, yes, that was the point. But don't. Don't argue. Don't explain. Don't make a case for your evolution. You don't need permission to be real. You've been reconstructing yourself brick by brick, while others were still admiring the ruin. They remember the version of you who tolerated everything, the one who overgave, oversmiled, overbent. But you are no longer elastic. You snap now. You break the silence with truth and let it echo. This is not selfishness. This is resurrection. But it's strange, isn't it? How healing feels like grief. You thought it would feel like light, but it feels like ashes. You thought it would be celebrated, but no one claps for your inner funeral. There's no parade for the person who says, I will no longer betray myself. Only empty chairs where people used to sit. Only quiet where there was once noise. Only the raw, unwelcome presence of your own soul. And yet, this is the most honest moment of your life. You start to see your old self not as a failure, but as a survival strategy. You forgive the one who tolerated. You thank the one who stayed silent. You nod to the one who made it through. But you don't go back. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow your own worth. You can't re-dull your voice to be more likable. They will say you've become cold, but you've just become clear. They will say you've become distant, but you've simply returned to yourself. And in that sacred return, you start to notice something unexpected. Peace. Not the peace that comes from agreement, but the peace of alignment. Your soul, once scattered in the mouths of others, has come home. And maybe that's what this death is. Not an end, but a reclamation. You bury the version of yourself that made everyone else comfortable and water the one that makes you alive. Even if no one shows up for the burial, even if they only remember the corpse, even if they call your becoming a loss. You didn't lose yourself. You lost the lie. And if no one ever approves again, would you still rise, even in silence, even alone, even without applause, simply because it is who you now are? There's a strange quiet that follows transformation. Not peace, not yet, but emptiness. A pause where the old noise used to live. The voices that told you who you should be, what you should feel, how you should serve. You've muted them, one by one, not with anger, but with absence. Now there's just space, and space, to the unprepared mind, feels like danger. You reach for distractions the way a drowning man reaches for driftwood. Old habits, old friends, old versions of yourself that no longer fit, but still hang in the closet like costumes from a life you outgrew. Sometimes, late at night, you almost miss it, the comfort of being needed, the sweetness of pleasing others, the soft reward of being agreeable. But it was sugar on a poisoned apple, and you finally tasted the rot. What you miss is not them. It's the illusion of being loved without condition. And now you see it for what it was, a contract you never signed but spent your life honoring. Be small, and we'll call you kind. Be agreeable, and we'll call you wise. Be selfless, and we'll let you belong. You were never loved for your wholeness. You were loved for your usefulness, and that love was a leash. Now you're walking, leashless, and it's terrifying. You find yourself unsure of how to speak, how to move. You no longer filter your truth, but the rawness of it still startles you. You say what you feel, and it lands like thunder in a room trained only for rain. You watch them blink, pull back, call you intense, and for a moment, you wonder if you've become too much. But the truth is, you've simply stopped being less. You're not louder. You're clearer. You're not ruder. You're real. You're not changing. You're returning. And of course, they don't recognize you. They never met the real you. Only the edited version, the one trimmed for approval, the one shaped by fear. And now, the raw edges are back. The truth that doesn't apologize. The silence that doesn't rush to fill. The presence that doesn't bend. This is what happens when you bury your former self. You don't just lose people. You lose a language, a culture, a religion of self-abandonment. You become fluent in discomfort. You stop translating your soul. You speak in your native truth and let the world feel foreign. Sometimes you catch yourself grieving, not for who you were, but for how easy life felt when you didn't know better. There's a bliss in blindness, a sweetness in sleep, but you've awakened. And awakenings are always followed by mourning, because when you wake up, you don't just gain clarity. You lose illusions. You lose false friends. You lose the luxury of pretending. You stand in a world you no longer recognize and realize the most terrifying truth of all. You are free. And freedom isn't comfort. It's risk. It's standing alone in a field without a script, without a costume, without a role. You become your own compass, and there's no applause for that, no medals. Just the steady, aching silence of knowing who you are and acting like it. They will try to pull you back, not with chains, but with guilt. Remember who you used to be, they'll say. But that's the thing. You do. You remember. And that's why you can never be that again. Because now you know the cost, the migraines, the anxiety, the people-pleasing that became self-erasure, the smile that cracked your soul, the nights you cried after conversations that looked normal on the outside. You remember what it took to keep them comfortable and how it nearly killed you, so you don't go back, even when it's lonely, even when your phone is quiet, even when your calendar is empty and your nights stretch out like cold sheets. You don't go back, because this loneliness is honest. This silence is sacred. And slowly, without asking permission, new people appear. Not many, not loud, but real. People who don't need you to shrink. People who don't mistake your clarity for cruelty. People who don't flinch when you're fully alive. But even then, you don't belong to them. Because this time, you belong to yourself. You sit at the edge of your own becoming, watching the ashes of who you were settle into the earth. No gravestone, no eulogy, just a quiet vow. I will not abandon myself again. And if no one follows, then you walk alone, because you finally know where you're going. There comes a morning when you wake up and don't feel broken, but you don't feel whole either. You feel unfamiliar, like the body is yours, but the voice inside is someone new, and in a way, it is because you've been rewired, not by some grand event, but by 1,000 small betrayals you finally stopped allowing. It's a quiet transformation, not the kind that gets praise. No weight loss to post, no certificate to share, just a new kind of stillness when you look in the mirror, a stillness that says, I no longer need to be anyone, for anyone. And that kind of stillness scares people because most aren't alive. They're animated, performing the roles they were handed, wearing personalities like uniforms, fitting themselves into lives they never questioned. But you questioned, and once you did, nothing fit the same. You became the one who ruins conversations, the one who doesn't laugh at the joke, the one who says, that doesn't feel right, the one who makes the room tense with your truth. And yes, you lost comfort, you lost ease, but you found something better, alignment. Because now your yes means yes, your no means no. Your smile isn't currency, your silence isn't surrender. You begin to realize something tragic. Most people would rather keep the peace than keep their soul. But you chose your soul. And so you lose people, not in an explosion, but in evaporation. They stop calling, you stop pretending, and the space between you grows like a river that neither of you wants to cross. You'll be tempted to swim back, to prove you're still kind, to prove you're still lovable, to prove you're still you, but you're not to them. They knew the mask. They hugged the mask. They texted the mask. They needed the mask because your real face has edges they were never willing to touch. So you let them go, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You cannot be both honest and obedient. You cannot be both free and pleasing. You cannot be both fully alive and universally accepted. The world has taught you to be soft is to bend, to be kind is to yield, to be wise is to remain silent. But you've learned to be soft is to stay open, even when it hurts. To be kind is to have boundaries that protect your truth. To be wise is to know when to walk away, with love, but without regret. Because what they call drama, you now call self-respect. What they call too sensitive, you now call deeply aware. What they call overreacting, you now call finally reacting. And somewhere in this desert of loneliness and clarity, you stop craving the old crowd. You stop seeking validation from the blind. You stop offering explanations to the deaf. You stop bleeding for those who only bring knives. You start building a sanctuary within yourself, a place where you can sit unfiltered, a place where your dreams aren't diluted for someone else's comfort, a place where your rage isn't called ugly, where your softness isn't called weak, where your silence isn't taken as submission, but as presence. And slowly, that sanctuary becomes your home. You decorate it with new truths. You light it with new boundaries. You fill it with new voices, not many but enough, voices that speak like mirrors, that say, I see you, not the costume, you. And for the first time, you believe them, because now you know the difference between being seen and being useful, between being loved and being controlled, between being chosen and being tolerated. You're not here to be tolerated. You're here to burn, to break, to bloom, to rise, not into someone better, but into someone truer. And yes, there are still days where the old self whispers, days when you think, maybe I'm just being difficult. Maybe I should go back. Maybe it's easier to be liked. But you remember the cost. You remember the ache. You remember the betrayal of smiling when you wanted to scream. So you stay, not in place, but in truth. And as that truth takes root, you notice something subtle but profound. Peace. Not the peace of being liked, not the peace of being agreed with, but the peace of no longer lying to yourself. And that peace is worth every misunderstanding, every quiet goodbye, every false friend that drifted away. You didn't lose them. You released them. Like taking off a costume you never liked, like walking out of a play you never auditioned for, like waking up, finally, from a dream where you were everyone but yourself. And so, I ask you again, if you never go back, if no one claps again, if every room grows quieter as you enter more fully into who you are, would it still be worth it? Would you still rise? You thought becoming yourself would feel like arrival, like stepping into sunlight after years in the cave. But the truth is, it feels more like exile, not because you did anything wrong, but because you finally did something honest. You stopped bending your spine into shapes that made others feel taller. You stopped feeding relationships that only survived on your silence. You stopped apologizing for the parts of you that never deserved shame. And the moment you did, the ground under your old life gave out. It had to, because you weren't living. You were performing. Every smile was strategic. Every word calculated. Every moment a quiet audition for love you hoped would stay. But love that needs you to vanish isn't love. It's possession. And now, here you are, not performing, not pretending, not shrinking, just standing. And still, somehow, people walk away. That's when the deeper grief sets in. Not that they left, but that they never really saw you. Only the version of you that agreed to disappear. So now, the mirror feels unfamiliar. You look at yourself, not with pride, not yet, but with suspicion. Like a wild animal, just released from a cage, pacing at the edge of freedom, unsure if it's allowed to roam. You question, am I too much now? Too distant? Too cold? But the truth is, you're just new. And new things always feel dangerous to those trained to feel safe in sacrifice. You begin to notice the world differently. Not louder, but clearer. You hear manipulation in words that once sounded sweet. You feel tension in rooms where you used to smile through the discomfort. You recognize the hunger in others, the way they feed on your confusion, your hesitation, your need to be liked. But that need is gone now, burned not by anger, but by clarity. And clarity, though beautiful, is brutal. It doesn't come with comfort. It doesn't come with company. It comes with distance. Distance from the crowd, from the noise, from the person you were trained to be. You start walking differently, not physically, but energetically. You enter a room and don't fold. You speak and don't dilute. You feel the space around you shift, as if people can sense that something is no longer available. Your compliance. They don't know what changed. They just know they no longer have access to the version of you that let them trespass without consequence. And maybe some part of you still aches for their comfort, for their closeness. But you begin to ask a deeper question. Was I ever truly close to them, or just conveniently shaped? That question follows you quietly. It follows you into empty evenings where no one texts back. It follows you into birthdays that feel quieter than they used to. It follows you into a silence that no longer feels cruel, but clean. You start to hear your own voice again, not the loud, anxious one that begged to be chosen, but the low, steady one that says, "You're already enough." That voice is not exciting. It doesn't impress others, but it doesn't lie either. It reminds you that being at peace with yourself means being at odds with a world addicted to pretending. It reminds you that leaving the role they assigned you doesn't make you a villain. It makes you awake. And awakening is always punished at first, not by enemies, but by the people you once needed most. You see it now, how they only loved the parts of you that loved them back, how they mistook your softness for submission, how they demanded your empathy but never offered their own, how they said, "You've changed," but what they meant was, you stopped being easy, and you have. You've stopped being easy to manipulate, easy to guilt, easy to use. You've become difficult, not because you're cruel, but because you're true. And truth, unlike performance, has weight. It lands. It disrupts. It ends things. But it also begins things. Real things. Things that don't ask you to vanish. Things that survive your honesty. Things that recognize you, not for how little space you take up, but for how clearly you now stand. And standing, even alone, begins to feel like a kind of joy. Not the loud kind, not the kind that dances and sparkles, but the kind that hums beneath your ribs when you realize, I'm not lying anymore. That joy is not cheap. It costs invitations. It costs attention. It costs the false comfort of fitting in. But in return, it gives you this. You no longer wait for others to choose you. You no longer need proof that you're worthy. You no longer barter your truth for connection. You become the home you were searching for. And yes, you're still building it, still dusting off the corners, still decorating it with language that feels like yours. But it's yours, and no one can take it from you now. So I'll ask one last time, not with urgency, but with reverence. If every mask falls away, if every false hand lets go, if every crowd forgets your name, would you still rise? Would you still choose to be this clear, this alive, this dangerous? There is a silence that comes after transformation, not the peaceful kind people imagine, but the kind that feels like the world has stepped away to give you space to meet yourself again. You don't feel victorious, and there's no audience waiting to celebrate your growth. There is only quiet, and in that quiet, something becomes clear. You did not improve yourself. You changed yourself. You are no longer the same person who once needed everyone's permission to exist fully. You begin to understand that real change doesn't happen in front of people. It happens when you're alone, when the performance ends, when no one is watching to tell you you're doing it right. You sit in your own presence and realize that for the first time you are not adjusting your tone or posture or thoughts for the comfort of someone else. You're just here, entire, untouched by expectation. It is in this strange, unfamiliar stillness that you realize how much of your old life was built on keeping others comfortable. You see now that the version of yourself people loved most was the one who asked for the least, who smiled through confusion, who kept showing up long after she was exhausted. That version was reliable, accommodating, soft around the edges, and utterly erased. You don't hate her. You don't judge her. You thank her for surviving. But she doesn't speak for you anymore. As you walk forward, you begin to notice the subtle shift in your surroundings. Some people treat you with caution now, not because you've become dangerous, but because you've become clear. There's no longer space for the old games, for the unspoken agreements where your silence was the price of acceptance. You no longer flinch at disapproval, and that unsettles people who are only ever close to you because you agreed not to disturb them. There are moments when the loneliness still stings. The phone rings less. The invitations shrink. You feel the distance between yourself and the familiar world widening, like a river you can no longer cross. You wonder sometimes whether the cost was too high, whether becoming yourself was worth the solitude it brought. But then something unexpected happens. You begin to enjoy your own company in a way that once felt impossible. You no longer search every moment for distraction or validation. You can sit in a room without needing to prove anything, and somehow that becomes the most powerful feeling of all. Not the pride of being admired, but the peace of not needing it. You start to speak differently, not louder, but slower. You no longer rush to fill silence just to soothe others. You listen more closely, but not out of obligation, out of curiosity. When you speak now, you mean it. And when you are silent, it's not because you're afraid. It's because the moment doesn't require your voice. In time, new people appear, not in crowds, not with noise, but with depth. They do not need you to be impressive. They do not flinch when your truth is sharp or quiet. They don't ask you to smile when you're tired. With them, you feel no pressure to explain yourself. And that's how you know they see the real you, because they don't need you to shrink. And still, even among these rare connections, you know now that your life cannot be built around being seen. It must be built around being honest. You will no longer shape yourself to fit into places that require pieces of you to be left behind. You will not trade peace for proximity. You will not silence your depth just to be digestible. It's a strange thing, this new life. It's not louder, not busier, not brighter. It's just truer. You feel your own presence like a weight in your chest. You know when something feels right without having to ask. You know when a room is wrong before a word is spoken. Your body no longer waits for permission. Your heart no longer makes itself small to keep others from feeling inadequate. There are still shadows, of course. The past never fully disappears. There are days when old habits knock on the door, when people from your former life try to pull you back into roles you've outgrown, but you recognize them now. And more importantly, you recognize yourself. You don't argue. You don't defend. You don't prove. You simply don't return because you remember what it cost. All the years you spent learning how to leave yourself. And now that you've come home, there is no going back. So the question that remains is not whether you've changed, you have. It is whether you are willing to remain this clear, this whole, this alive, even if no one ever applauds again. Are you willing to be real, even if being real means being alone? Because at the end of all things, when everything has been stripped away, the roles, the praise, the audience, there is only this, the quiet truth of who you are when no one is watching,